Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. And today I'm joined by Grace and Alex, where we're going to talk about how a lot of clients don't understand the value that is brought by trade outlets, especially when they want to get national media, and how to show them that the niche reach of a trade outlet can often be that top tier impact they're looking for trust, brand credibility, and sales. Alex and Grace, if you'd introduce yourselves.
You can
Go
go
ahead,
first,
Grace.
Alex.
No.
I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace. I am a Senior Vice President at PANBlast. So we are a smaller division of the larger organization of Pan Communications. I would say our division is best known for our focus on B2B tech and SaaS brands. So specifically, we focus on clients that are in sort of an emerging growth or high growth stage, typically Series B to Series D, though we do have clients everywhere from Series A to public companies. Mostly we focus on helping clients grow their credibility through driving larger business outcomes. So things beyond just getting coverage for coverage sake. I think to this conversation, I bring mostly like an agency operator point of view. So I do a lot with counseling prospects in the new business phase about their goals, balancing client expectations about, what they want versus the reality of PR, and educating execs on media strategy. So that's me, and I'll hand it over to Alex.
Great. Thanks, Grace. Nice to meet you, by the way. We haven't met before, so it's nice to meet you. I'm Alex Dudley. I run the issues and crisis practice here at MikeWorldWide. We're a $60 million a year in annual revenue, independent PR firm covering clients, big and small across industries. Personally, I specialize in a lot of crisis work around issues and issue management, particularly labor and litigation support. And obviously M&A is a big crisis driver these days, as is everything related to the federal government. So that's kind of what I do here at MikeWorldWide, and I'm excited to join the panel. Thanks for having us, Dustin.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun, and everyone who's watching, feel free to bring your questions into the comments. I'll be watching. When I'm looking down, I'm not falling asleep. It's because I'm looking at the comment section. So let me know if you have any questions. I'll bring them into the conversation. This is a real interesting topic to me because I had to learn it twice in the last decade. I was a PR freelancer while being a full-time journalist. And my first director role, my only director role for starting my company, was with a trade association that really hadn't had someone in that role before. And so I was real proud that the New York Times linked our video press release, and Chicago Tribune quoted me, and NPR stations. But as I noticed, they weren't really making an impact. They were raising the brand credibility, but they weren't making an impact on the association's ability to make an impact legislatively or regulatory issues in the state levels. And what I noticed that when we got involved in the four general trades, but also the really small niche ones that in the pet industry are like the reptile people. These aren't Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. These are people who care about snakes, the reptiles, the fish people. When we started getting covered there intentionally, one person said, "I thought you had forgotten about us." And that allowed us to really make a much bigger impact by reaching those niche trades that created that groundswell of support to oppose or support specific legislation. And then I had to learn it again when I started Proven Media Solutions. I was getting into Forbes and Business Insider, and it wasn't driving a single bit of sales, but getting in PR Daily, PR Week, etc., helped us reach our target audience, the communications teams at agencies and consultants. And so I wanted to have this discussion from the perspective of the agency, where we all want the logos. We also want to serve our clients, and also how to set expectations, because again, I learned this twice, and I'm sure I'm not the only person. So, Grace, you had an interesting perspective. I think both of you actually mentioned it in our prep call, that a lot of times the agencies have to get over our own sort of self-interest of wanting those big logos. How do you all, help guide your teams to focus on the client first instead of the company's interest?
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, on our prep call, Alex is the one that brought this up, and he kind of pushed me on it because I had a funny meme that I posted yesterday that was the distracted boyfriend, and he's looking at the Wall Street Journal, and I compared it to a client who's always saying, I want to be in the Wall Street Journal as my #1 thing that I want as a result from PR. And Alex actually challenged that, and he said, I think it's PR people that want the big wins. And I kind of have to agree with him on that one. We do hear that a lot in the new business process, that clients want to be in top tier. Of course, they're going to say that. But to be perfectly honest, you know, as a PR person, we want the big wins too. We want to add it to our portfolio. But I would say, like, at our agency, at least, you know, we have certain little awards like Wow Win of the Week, and we always try and encourage not just to submit the top tier wins, but to submit the smaller trade wins as well. And if they have valuable components to them, did they have, you know, key client messaging? Did they have a backlink? Did they mention client data, something like that? But having those smaller wins for internally, at least at the agency, highlighting those trade wins. But that was Alex's perspective.
Well, Grace, I think something that you said in your introduction is critical to this part of the conversation too, which is like you're focused on business results, business outcomes. I think too often that is missed, like in the initial client meetings, it's all about what we can do for you instead of about what you're trying to do for yourself and then driving our strategy towards that. And I think having those conversations early on with clients is the key to kind of understanding this entire concept of creating an outreach plan that makes a lot more sense for your business goals than just for PR goals or for ego or, you know, all the other dozens of factors that come into these types of decisions.
Now, to your point, Alex, you know, we're all coming from different perspectives here. Grace, you've highlighted that you work a lot with, I'll admit my ignorance here. I don't know the difference between a Series B and a Series Z. So you'll have to educate me a little bit as we go here. But it sounds like you're working with companies that are relatively new and still kind of growing in their marketplace. Whereas Alex, you work a lot with clients who are anticipating or going through a crisis. Can you explain from your different points of view how you do that upfront education with clients? You know, one of the things we talked about earlier was when we put the client's interests first, that doesn't just mean that we have to assume that they know what we're talking about. We have to uncover their pain points. We have to learn their personality. We have to learn all of those things. We can't just be PR experts. We have to be business experts. Now, can you explain how that works for each of the teams that you lead when you're talking to prospective or brand new clients?
Yeah, I have kind of two thoughts on this or directions that I could take it. One is, you know, you mentioned we work with high growth companies. Typically, they've gotten some rounds of investment. They're investing that a lot into product development and marketing and sales. And so they're looking to scale quickly, which is part of the reason they want to invest in PRs. They want increased visibility, likely for winning over new business, but also potentially attracting investors. And if that's the case, sometimes that's why they want to be in top tier. They feel like their board is telling them, or their current investors are telling them, you know, we read Forbes, we read the Wall Street Journal, that's where we want to see you. And that makes sense. But I think if that's your reality, you have to be open to talking about different types of things than are specific to your prospects or who's going to be eventually your customer. Maybe it looks like talking about your leadership philosophy, your investment philosophy, what it was like for you when you raised your most recent round. The Financial Times might cover that more so than they're going to cover the ins and outs of your technology. The second piece was about counseling clients and goal setting. And I think that's just all the upfront work in, candidly, the new business process and also in the onboarding process as we live off of OKRs, objectives, and key results. And we try and be upfront about what we believe we can achieve, what's going to impact your business goals. So the objective, we're always starting with the client's objective, and that is not to get 10 pieces of coverage or 15 pieces of coverage. It's to increase visibility with X audience. Okay, how do we tackle that? Where's the audience? If the audience is in trade publications, then that's going to be our go-to route.
And from a crisis perspective, it's a little bit different. I mean, my preferred alternative is that a company calls me before they're in crisis so they can prepare. And what I tell them when they do that is that in today's world where LLMs are really driving the narrative around your company, and trade media is having an outside impact on the LLM's point of view. And make no mistake, the LLMs each have a point of view about all things, including your brand. And so if trade media is one of the primary drivers of the LLM's opinion of you, then it behooves you to have a relationship with trades in your industry. And then if a company comes to us already in crisis, which, you know, more than I'd like is the case, then we need to talk about, then the conversation is a little bit different. It's about which audience are you trying to protect? Which audience is critical to your brand success or to successfully navigating this crisis? And that may be investors, it may be customers, it may be regulators. And so helping to determine who that is will also help you determine the best course of action from a crisis management standpoint. And obviously there are different trade publications for each of those constituencies.
I just want to weigh in on the trade impact on AI visibility quickly, because we did, sort of an internal look at AI visibility for a bunch of our different clients. We use a tool called Peak AI, and we put in some prompts for clients in different verticals, HR, retail, security, healthcare, procurement, that kind of thing. And we're looking at the sources that the LLMs were pulling based on the prompts that we put in. Across the board, a large majority of what I saw was trade publication. So in HR, I was seeing training industry, people managing people. In retail, I'm seeing Digiday, Total Retail. In procurement, Procurement Mag consistently is showing up as a source. So I know that Muck Rat did come out with a report on that, editorial sources impact LLMs, and a lot of what they showed were top tier, but candidly in my research, it was almost all trade publications.
I remember you posted
The other
about this,
thing,
Chris, too.
sorry, I was just going to say, I think the other thing to consider is just that, in a world where newsrooms are shrinking everywhere, the expertise level at the trade publications remains high. So I think, the reason that the LMs draw from that is because those stories tend to be deeper. Grace, you were mentioning that when you're prepared to talk to Financial Times or one of the international or national outlets, you have to be prepared to go broad. Whereas with the trade pubs, you can go deep. And I think that that's part of the reason that the LLMs draw from those outlets as for their source material.
Well, and even beyond that too is for every national trade outlet that is, as you both have said, wants to go broad, there are 10 trade outlets. And depending on your definition of a trade outlet, it could be a Substack, it can be a podcast, it can be a traditional trade outlet or a blog. And so all sorts of those things are way more numerous. They're way easier to get into. So you can have a big whiff at the Wall Street Journal or CNBC, or have 8 wins that are all living online that you're all repurposing through social media, influencers, and all the other tools of marketing and branding. So I think that's the other thing that we have our clients understand is if you want to build that credibility, and Grace, you sent this in some of your notes yesterday, was you talk to your media needs to see their B-roll footage. They need to know that you're ready for them because they don't want to make a mistake.
Yeah, we talk a lot about PR maturity with our clients, and what phase are you in? Are you still building a foundation and developing your bench of spokespeople? Do you have a defined ICP? Do you have established messaging? Those sorts of things. Kind of reaching that middle point of consistency where maybe you're regularly appearing on podcasts, you have a steady cadence of news that's coming out of your organization, you've started briefing analysts, that sort of thing. To maturity is the point that I consider to be the best case scenario for my clients, at least, is when they're starting to get inbounds, right? Journalists are coming to us and saying, hey, we want you to comment on X topic because we've seen you X, Y, and Z places. And I will say, this is about trade media. We have started to get inbounds for our clients that are active on LinkedIn, if they're seen as an expert on LinkedIn on certain topics, or in trade media, that will get inbounds at that point in time. So if you're not at the mature point, which most of our clients starting out, they're not there, they're somewhere in these first 2 stages, we have to build you to get there. So we have to trade opportunities. We always say say yes mindset is my number one thing I look for in a client. Are they going to say yes to the opportunities that we bring them? Because know that we're bringing them for a reason.
Now, how do you both bring the marketing teams into the trade strategy? We're a 8-person PR firm. When we work with clients, we tell them it's either just earned media as brand cover, if you will, it's the air cover over whatever else you're doing, or we want to make sure that you have a robust marketing team in place to make sure that each win is maximized. We had a client, I learned this real painfully 2 years ago. We had a client that had spent a lot of money on us. We got Fox News, we got Washington Examiner, Newsweek, we got Social Work Magazine, Psychology Today. It drove maybe 200 hits to their website. because their social media person was part-time and didn't know what she was doing. They didn't have a grant strategy, a fundraising strategy. They didn't have an SEO plan in place. And so it all just shriveled up and died. And that taught us that we really have to make sure that our client, we have to set very clear expectations. So we actually find the most success when we're working with clients who understand how to take that marketing and run with it. How do you incorporate the rest of your either internal teams, if those are part of your marketing collateral, or your clients' teams to make sure that you're creating that maximum value?
Well, I think you have to do both, right? I think you have to maximize your client's team, but really it starts by looking at it as holistically as possible, right? Like understanding that, media relations is part of a communications program, is part of an overall brand program and reputation program. And so, seeing it as a layered campaign is the first step, because, like the tendency in the past is, just one and done, and national, like striving for national media feeds that beast a little bit, right? Like it can feel like hey man, we just hit the apex there, so we're all set. When the truth is that really in today's world, you just have to drive a sustained campaign, and that's gonna require more than just one top tier media hit. It requires a concerted effort to across the spectrum of communicating, that requires focus and diligence.
Yeah. One thing that, I mean, coverage can't just run and you do nothing else with it. I mean, we all know you have to arm your sales team with it. You have to post on LinkedIn, you have to promote it, put money behind it, a million things. But one thing that we like to do with our marketing teams that can tap into sales as well, as we'll meet and see if your organization has, a list of top ABM targets. We'll then look and try and figure out if those ABM targets are active in media somewhere. Are they active on LinkedIn? Is there publicly available commentary that's relevant to the topics that we're talking about that we can pull and inject into our articles? So say we have a client in healthcare and they're targeting hospital systems. We'll look up the CEO of the CTO of that hospital system and see, are they talking about their hospital's use of AI? Is there a quote we can pull? We'll put that into our article. And that way when it runs, most organizations and people have an alert set up for their own name or their own organization, and they'll say, hey, who's this company that's writing about me? And it's kind of one more touch point with the org as far as sales is concerned. That happens a lot more frequently in trade publications than it does top tier. We have so much more control if it's a contributed article that's going to go in a trade publication, and there's just fewer and fewer opportunities for contributed content top tier right now. So that's like a really good way to connect your marketing and sales team to your media team. And mostly that happens in trades.
It's a really good point. We're working with somebody who has some really good content targeted to CMOs. And so we advise this client to do is to actually interview with past colleagues and some other folks who are legitimately in their network, but they're also prospects.
Sure.
So we've actually conducted the interviews. So these pieces are already strong, but the interviews will really drive home key points. And when we land, it's not going to land, as you said, in the Wall Street Journal. It'll land in, this isn't actually an outlet, I don't think, but CMO Magazine. And land there where they're going to be proud to show off the quote. And that person will live on their wall as a gold star ally. And it creates more of that reputation and trust.
I think another thing to think about in the entire ecosphere that we're talking about is that everything begets each other, right? So reporters are cruising socials like LinkedIn, looking for experts in the fields for which they're about to write a story, right? So there's rewards that go beyond, it used to be that you had to, as the PR person, create a pitch to a reporter, and that was the only definite, that you had like 3 sentences to nail your spokesperson as an expert on the topic that you were hoping this reporter was covering. Now reporters are cruising LinkedIn, and they're looking, so let's say they're talking about AI and they're about to write an article on AI. They're looking on LinkedIn to see who's talking about AI in a smart way. And it's using socials to generate inbound is another often overlooked opportunity.
Well, I think too, when I talk, the goal, a lot of times when you're talking to a client, everyone wants that silver bullet, right? Most people who are bad at finances want that silver bullet to being rich, not a plan that's going to take a lot of effort and time.
Hmm.
I was raised by an entrepreneur who today gets calls from small businesses that are doing 250, 300 a year, and they want to accelerate. So then they find out the cost of doing so, and they say, "What's my guarantee?" Well, your guarantees you'll stay at $250,000 a year. People always want these guarantees, and so we have it on our website. We have a guarantees page on our website, and the first thing we say is we can't guarantee placement. And we're just very straightforward about it. And I think that when we talk to prospects, when we lay out that trade media has a higher chance of coverage, and trade media is going to build that into the overall campaign to try to reach that top tier press. If that, to your point, Grace, you're trying to reach investors and others, that should be where you go. But a lot of times, I was talking to Shannon from NextPR last week on the show about this, and she pointed out that you say yes to, okay, we'll aim for the Wall Street Journal, knowing that getting there requires doing all the things that work better in PR anyway, like trade pubs, like niche Substack, etc. So by the time the client gets to the Wall Street Journal or USA Today, they're usually already really happy because they're seeing those outcomes being driven. So how do you all kind of set those expectations when a client is so insistent? For us, a lot of times it's just taking the Chris Voss approach of restating what they've said. It's really building that sort of emotional trust to make sure they can give us that 3 to 6 month window to prove what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Grace said it earlier. She looks for clients with a high degree of saying yes,
Yes,
right? Like,
that's a good point.
because there's so many stumbling blocks along the way to great media coverage. But one of the biggest ones, the most frequent ones, is that despite the desire to get coverage, when you bring the opportunity, a client will say no. For whatever reason, whether it's not the right outlet or not the right reporter, or not exactly the right story, and they don't understand how to kind of pivot from what the reporter wants to talk about to include what they want to talk about. So, I mean, I think a propensity to say yes is really, and Grace pointed it out, the propensity to say yes is what you got to look for first. And I think the other thing is sometimes you got to, sometimes if you believe enough in the story, you've got to take a chance as the PR person too, right? Like if you believe in the story that you're about to tell and you believe that you can find an outfit that will run it or some semblance of it, then sometimes you got to put your neck out there a little bit and say, yeah, we really do believe that. And I don't know whether that's a guarantee or not. But I think there are scenarios we can say, I really think we can do something with this, provided that you're willing to meet us where we need to be to get the story to fruition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I love your no guarantees page on your website, Dustin. That's great. And of course, any agency that's guaranteeing coverage is doing something shady behind the scenes. But I can say I've been doing this for, 13 years and I've never seen a client go a quarter without coverage. So I can't guarantee it, but I can tell you that on average, our clients get a certain amount of coverage every quarter and this many top tier and yada, yada. I have lots of data to back up what I'm saying to prospects when they're asking about that. I think when it comes to goal setting, we do a couple of things. One, and I'm sure, every agency has some kind of coverage scorecard that they measure their coverage against. And the reason we kind of ended up creating one as an agency, it was years ago, was because, we're getting that ask for top tier, and clients aren't seeing the comprehensive value of coverage that's not top tier sometimes. So we do a thing where we'll measure it based on what type of coverage is. Is it a full feature? That's worth a little more weight than a press release posting or an organic mention. Is it a podcast or a quote that's up here, but maybe it's not as good as a feature? So it starts there with a certain number of points. Then we will add on points for things like, did it have your data? Was a customer mention? Was there an ABM mention? Was there a backlink? And top tier is also an add-on. If it was top tier, it gets extra points, right? Because it reaches more people. So it will fall into one of three categories for us. The top tier we call premier tier, but trade coverage often lands there. And I think setting it out like that and showing clients like the value of this piece of coverage that's top tier is not as high because it's a small mention and a broad article versus this piece is a feature about your company and it lays out exactly what you do, speaks to your ICP, and it has a backlink to your site. This is actually worth more than this. So sometimes it's breaking it down for our clients because their level of PR knowledge, I mean, they're not in it every day like we are. They're hiring an agency that's an expert for a reason. So I think setting OKRs and kind of a scoring methodology can be helpful. And I would also say just transparency, because clients don't want to hear like, we're trying, we're trying to get you top tier.
Right.
They want to know what you're doing and what you're pitching and who
Yeah.
you're hearing back from. And they don't always understand that most of the time we don't hear back because journalists are just flooded with tons of pitches, and they can't write you an individual email and say, here's why I couldn't run with your story idea, but I love it and thanks for pitching it.
Right.
And so transparency on, okay, this week we're doing a deep dive into this publication and we found this journalist that we think is a good fit for this reason. We're pitching them this story. They want to know that you're chasing it, right? Like Alex made a really good point. It's like, you have to be willing to go and get the at-bats. You can't just say like, this article, this story isn't going to make it to top tier unless you try. There has to be some effort there, and clients want to see the effort.
Yeah, and I think we should also point out that there's a difference between a guarantee, which means an ad, and betting on yourself and your agency, right? Which I think we should all do, right? I think, you know, when I see a story that I believe is going to resonate, I'm perfectly willing to bet on myself and my team to deliver that in a way that's going to resonate with reporters in a way that gets coverage. So I think that's where you have to be really careful. Yeah, there are no guarantees because it is all earned media. But the truth is that at some point you have to be willing to bet on yourself and frankly put your money where your mouth is. And sometimes you'll miss, right? And I think that's okay. And like if you're trying to woo a client or impress a client, and you have to put a guarantee on it to get them to give it a shot because you think you can deliver. I think sometimes there are times and scenarios where that can be worth it. And then if you miss, you miss. But the truth is that if you're not willing to put some of your own agency skin in the game, then you can't be surprised when clients aren't just jumping into the boat with you.
One thing, Grace, that you laid out, and you didn't call it this, but so many firms, I used to be afraid earlier. My company's been around for 7 years, and early, I was always fighting for every dollar, and I didn't want to lay out too many secrets. I didn't want to give away too many tips because everyone wanted free advice, and those who want free advice are the lowest paying clients. They're the biggest headaches, and they're never going to hire you again because they ran out of money and they have the highest expectations. And over the years, what I've learned is that laying out the sausage, showing how the sausage is made, the clients who are worth working with are not going to take your tips and run because they don't know how to do it. As you said, there's a reason they're hiring an agency. I love that you lay out, I hadn't thought about what you're talking about, the different value systems here, because a mention in the Wall Street Journal is that worth more than XYZ trade outlet where there is a feature. Bringing that to the table for your clients must give them a huge amount of trust because you're laying out the sausage without giving away so much that they can take it and then copy and paste it into their own person and run with it. I think that gives a huge amount of credibility.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of as we move upstream, something that tends to happen is like early on, a younger company that doesn't have as big of a marketing team, we're oftentimes working with like a VP of marketing, could be a CMO as like our contact, and we're moving upstream to bigger orgs. We are more frequently working with a comms person or even a PR person. And honestly, when I first started getting contacts that were PR people, that was one of the more challenging things because they potentially have their own pitching that they're doing on their end.
Yes.
They're more educated on, what we should be doing and what they believe we should be doing. And so once I kind of switched my perspective to collaborating with my client versus like necessarily trying to present them the most perfect quarterly report that they're like shocked and surprised by. They should never be shocked by your results. You should be in constant communication.
Right.
And I do think
Yes.
that we're huge collaborators. So like something that was working for, this was a couple of years ago, that funding rounds, we were finding that we were pitching funding rounds and journalists were like wanting to hear directly from the CEOs. And so we started writing pitches for our CEOs to send. So almost like taking us like a step out of the process, but like it's that collaboration and that like no agency wants to be a black box. You want to be as open as possible with your clients and show them what you're doing. So I'm no longer afraid of like, you know, teaching my clients or anything like that these days, because I do feel like the inherent value that we're providing is enough to where like I can share some trade secrets. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, my PTSD kicked in, Dustin, when you started talking about clients where, low value, high need. I think Grace is right. The truth is that clients that are the most fun to work with, where you can generate the most success, are the most collaborative, right? And they get it. They get that they may know certain aspects more than the firm, but they also know that the firm that they've hired brings value as well.
Yep.
And I think if you're in competition with your client, you're losing already, right? That's ugly money, and nobody wants to chase that. And I think the truth is that this whole culture that's thriving on LinkedIn right now about kind of giving away the secrets, in the notion that it's really not the secrets that people are buying, but your experience and your expertise, is leading to, in the best case scenarios anyway, leading to much more fruitful relationships, which is what it's really all about. Because if you're just a vendor, that's a limited engagement, a limited and limiting engagement. But if you're a partner, it's a much more fruitful relationship.
And anyone who's watching, by the way, bring your questions. We're going to make a little bit of a pivot here and talk about how to prepare a client. Grace, well, I forget your exact phrase from earlier, but we all talked in various ways about preparing a client for trade media on the way to propel them towards whatever goal they want. Again, not more placements, but sales, investors, legislative outcomes, etc. One of the things I think it's most interesting is when you have a client where they're willing to spread the wealth of who's the spokesperson. I mentioned in our prep call that this wasn't a trade outlet situation, but I think it applies. The principle applies. The national spokesperson for a political effort we were supporting last year didn't want to be the person representing the effort at the state level, because this person understood that they were not the most credible voice, and that local and regional statewide media don't care about someone out of DC. They care about the local activist. They care about the elected official inside that state. Similarly, the non-nerdy CEO may not be the best fit for the technical outlet. And so what we've started to do as our client base has grown is we have a trucking client right now. Their marketing person's amazing. But then right away we started working together. Any kind of data we asked for, the context we asked for surrounding the data, and she brought 3 spokespeople to our attention in the first 2 weeks and got us interviews with those people so we could prepare them for the different trades that we were targeting. How do you help, what advice can you give to other agency people watching right now on how to make sure that clients don't see that as a headache, but see that as a preparation for success?
Well, I mean, I think any client that's not willing to do the prep work is not really a client. I mean, they're just temporary. I mean, if you're not willing to invest the time into preparing for something that you're about to do in public, I mean, this is effectively in public. Like, if you are the CMO of a company and you're about to give a presentation in public, you're going to prepare for it. And the same is true for an interview. So I think oftentimes it's a matter of access and time. Like they don't want to, they just don't have time. Everybody's incredibly busy. And I think that's again where you benefit by clearly demonstrating what the value of the output is going to be, because people make time for what's valuable. And so if you can demonstrate to your clients what the value of the time that they're about to put in will yield, then you can get them to commit that time. But if they're unwilling, at some point you gotta let go, because that's just a recipe for disaster.
I think that limitations on time are perhaps your foot in the door to expanding the spokesperson bench, honestly, because if Mrs. CEO cannot take interviews because she's too busy being a CEO and running the organization, we can say that person is not available. Who below her is available? And you can keep going like that, where we'll find that some of our most prolific spokespeople, are individual contributors at an organization. If we're talking to a DevOps trade publication, there's someone that is a developer, and that's who they want to hear from. And so those people, in my experience, typically have more availability to take a prep call with us, actually review a briefing sheet that we put together, read the talking points that we've sent to them, listen to a podcast before they go on it. Your people that are higher up the ladder at an org may be more media trained and readily available to take that stuff without a ton of prep, but the people that don't get as many requests or maybe lower down the ladder in terms of title, I've found will contribute the time into prepping for the conversation.
How does that play out, Alex, with you as a crisis person? Is it typically the CEO people want that stakeholders want to hear from? Is it someone maybe more directly involved at a local issue? Is it the local manager? How does that same dynamic play out during a crisis when trying to reach trades?
I mean, I think it's harder in crisis, right? I mean, people want in the midst of crisis, theoretically, for it to rise to the level of crisis, you're talking about something that could impact the company at such a holistic level that it's going to require someone close to the top of the organization. I think from my perspective in crisis, the more important thing to look for is consistency, right? Having one spokesperson is preferable to having 10, particularly in crisis. As information moves around very quickly, and more importantly, interpretation of that information happens differently at different levels of the organization and with different people. Having one voice to speak in crisis tends to be the most effective way to ensure that the story is told in the way that the company wants.
So I'll admit my ignorance here as not being a crisis expert. I would have thought that having a couple of sort of people more directly involved supporting that narrative and spreading it around could be more effective because it's different voices who may have different levels of trust. Does that create a lot more complication because you have to train
100%.
those people in the talking points?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, as information flows in crisis, you want to establish a single source of truth. Because everybody they come with different skill sets, they come with different points of view, they come with different nuances. And I think what you risk is the story getting away from you. And look, in crisis, the more you may not have control over the situation. But I think that the better you can be about your message discipline will prevent mis and disinformation from seeping into the narrative.
So self-inflicted injuries is what you're talking about.
I mean, there's self-inflicted. There's, like if you're talking about 3 different spokespeople with different varying degrees of perspective and experience, an intrepid reporter who's seeking a particular angle might have more success leading someone down a path than someone else, right? So I think you want to lead with your best talent at the spokesperson game when you're in crisis. I just think that it's not the time to be experimenting with who might be a good voice here or what might be a good perspective. You want to go with what you're most confident in and the people you're most confident in.
Alex, I'm curious about in a crisis scenario, if you're getting inbounds for comments, how do you weigh which ones to respond to with either a response at all, period, a written response versus if it's a trade publication like we're talking about versus say a top tier that's asking you about it? How do you weight those things in terms of, who should we be actually giving a live interview to?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it is relationship driven, right? So if you have a relationship with a trade reporter and they are calling in the middle of a crisis, you might be more inclined to speak with them because of their background understanding of your industry, because of your relationship with them. They know who you are as a company, and they may even know who you are as a business executive. And that might create a level of trust and comfort that makes you more likely to participate in a live interview with them. I think, the other thing is if you're you're always considering what angle outlets are
Mhm.
pursuing, right? So if you're talking about a big national outlet, particularly broadcast, but not solely, that is not one that covers your industry ordinarily, that has a tendency to feel like the high potential for a hatchet job. And that's, obviously what you're trying to avoid. So Grace, I think the truth is that when you're in crisis and you have an opportunity to participate in a live interview with a trade outlet, you might be more likely to do it. Now, I think the one thing that trades have going against them in that scenario is they don't tend to publish as frequently. Although, these days that's totally different given everybody's really online. But I think, the thing you struggle with trades in crisis scenarios is the reach. And if the crisis is reaching millions and millions of people, but your trade outlet isn't, that gives you pause. So, you kind of have to weigh those against each other, and the answer may be different at different points in the crisis, or maybe different for different crises. But the truth is, I would always love to get an executive with someone that they know and trust and have a relationship with where it makes sense.
Mhm.
Oh, as you were talking, Alex, 2.5 years ago, we were working with an AI firm that it was right when Dow Jones threatened to sue OpenAI for allegedly going behind the WSJ paywall without paying for it. And the client picked up on the story. We had a meeting about it. And I said, well, we said, what can you say that would actually be interesting and stand out? And they said, well, we actually spend more money on 8,000 content sources for the generative AI system we use than we do on our software every month. We turned that into 3 weeks of pitching, and I got we published the press release, a text interview, and a video interview at 2 outlets, one domestic targeting hedge funds, one over in Europe. And they were super happy with those placements. Not that necessarily OpenAI was in a crisis, but there was a lot of news about different media outlets threatening to sue and actually suing AI companies. So can both of you speak to a little bit about taking advantage of crises through the trade media in a way that doesn't look like it? Grace, do you see opportunities for your clients to elevate their brand maybe more aggressively, much like when the stock market goes down, you're supposed to invest more. So when it recovers, you can rebound.
Mhm. The one example I can think of, and I'm sure Alex has many more examples than I do, because like you, Dustin, we don't necessarily specialize in crisis communications
Sure.
proactively as an agency. We obviously handle it for our clients that are going through a crisis. But I'll say, like, we had a client that was in the governance security space, and they had a data breach. And that was covered in TechCrunch. And obviously that led to, we dealt with the crisis when we needed to, that we laid off pitching for a little bit and laid low. But something I would have loved to be able to get them to do, which I couldn't really get them to bite on at the time, was 6 months later, maybe a year later, their entire perspective was, a data breach or an outage or these things that happen to tech companies is something to prepare for because it's something that's inevitable. It's going to happen. Therefore, you need our software to prepare for those scenarios. And so I would have loved for them to be able to take an advantage and a year later, looking back, say, like we've been saying, this sort of thing is inevitable. This happens in the realm that we live in. And here's what we learned from it. Here's how we prepared for it when it happened to us. Here's what the outcomes were. Here's how we communicated with our customers, that kind of thing. I couldn't get them to bite on it for, obvious reasons. I think it's a little bit risky. But I do think that there's some ability for you to turn a crisis into, a media opportunity later, because TechCrunch covered the crisis. Maybe they'd be interested in a follow-up on, how it all went down.
Yeah, I think Grace, it's a great point. Like, I'm always looking for ways with clients that they can emerge from the crisis in a stronger position. Like, there's one level of crisis defense, and that's great. And if you do a good job, that's great. Frankly, the best crises are the one that I consider are the ones you've never heard of, right? Because we've managed to get it under control before you've heard of it. But once you're in crisis and it's public, I think what we're looking for are ways that you can emerge stronger, whether that's a story about lessons learned or a story about changes that you're making, or as a result of the crisis. I think everybody's always looking for that. I think as far as the tactic that you described, Dustin, that kind of newsjacking, I think there's some occasions when that makes some sense. I think there's a lot of companies out there who smartly think, there but for the grace of God go I, and are a little bit reluctant in kind of crisis scenarios. And I find that, ironically, in Grace's example, I find that to be particularly true in the data breach space, because Grace is right. It truly is a matter of when, not if. So I think what you'll find is that there's not a lot of competitors who are going to just go out and dance on somebody's grave and those things. So I think, there's a window. It's more like crisis adjacent rather than like, parading, haha, look at them is a bad look.
Yeah.
And
You never want to
certainly,
go up. That's what I didn't mean to imply that.
yeah, I mean, I think, but look, I think there was a day and age where you could or you would, right? We're not them, like that might be a great message. I think that in today's world, the stakes are so high and things move so quickly and situations change so quickly that you have to be really careful about that. And I think most companies, in my experience, are.
Yeah, we will. I mean, it's not the same. We will proactively pitch on vulnerabilities for our cyber clients. Like we have a client in AppSec that found some vulnerabilities in the Perplexity Android app, and we pitched that out and got Forbes. There's an example of something that top tier is interested in that's in the cyberspace because it's relevant to anyone that's using the Android Perplexity app. So you're taking it to the level of like general consumer interest. We will pitch that out. But yeah, I would say agree on we don't want to dance on the grave because it's a matter of when, not if.
Yeah. I mean, but talking about BizGen, that's like, pitching Forbes around a vulnerability is BizGen for your client that you're
Totally.
So
That's a good point. Well, too, like a lot of what we do is we find third-party authors and influencers for our clients, so especially our public policy clients. We're working with the agency. The agency has a client, and the client doesn't want to be the only person talking about XYZ issue. And so they'll ask us, and sometimes a lot of our authors are no-name people, which is more impactful than having that clearly politicized name or a former member of Congress. And what we've been able to do is sort of take advantage of the crisis through these third-party voices. So when this, controversy with A and B companies or government agency and this company, we can hop in with the third-party voices through op-eds or interviews and say, hey, here's another perspective. That actually allows our clients to not be their own spokesperson, but simply representing the trades to push the advocacy forward.
Yeah. Well, we don't live in the same realm as you, Dustin, but we will do that with our clients' customers. So, I mean, we've definitely pitched, articles on behalf of a customer before where, we're writing it for them. Obviously, they can review it and edit however they like. But placing that with a trade publication, maybe it mentions our client, but mostly it's talking about the industry and kind of the perspective they'd like to further.
Yeah, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said, "Speak softly and join a very vocal trade group," right?
Or prop one up. Or prop one up.
You mentioned like having like almost celebrity types of people that are widely known, and I'll say like that does matter for top tier. Things that we feel like matters for top tier and can get attention. Like we have an anti-money laundering client that they have on staff, a former DEA agent, who's a fantastic spokesperson for us because he's, notable and people have heard of him or heard of his work or they're impressed by his background. So I would say times to lean on those people that, have some weight behind their name would be when you are wanting top tier.
Well, that's a really good point, especially with the trades, because it's not like they're looking for the soft, we've gotten people without large brands into USA Today, but those are public facing things, the human interest at USA Today versus the trades that need to see that expertise and that nuanced messaging, that niche messaging.
Yeah, and I think, going back to something that Grace led with, and it's almost a first full circle moment, like getting someone in USA Today is one thing. And you can say, yep, we got you in USA Today. But my guess is that article in USA Today didn't go into very much depth about your client's company and what they do and how they offer a solution. It was more about their opinion around something else. And so I think you got to be really careful about how you chase those things and make sure that like if you know, like there again, it's great to get into USA Today for name recognition, I guess. Although with attention spans as short as they are, I'm not sure that the value is really there. I mean, if you really want to go in depth, you go to trade, and I think that's where we started the conversation, and I think it's a great example of it.
No, you're right. I mean, we actually had a client over the summer. There was a bit of a crisis at the FDA, and our client took advantage of it to push their agenda, their related agenda. And we had one author. We got one piece at USA Today and one piece at The Hill. The one at USA Today, they had a lot of similar information. This person's the mother of someone with a rare disease. Her child has a degenerative rare disease. The human interest side was similar at both, but the USA Today piece leaned far more heavily into the human interest side, whereas the piece at The Hill was far more technical on regulations and the impact of the FDA approval process and all of those things. Whoops, microphone dropped. And so to your point, Alex, yes, getting those things looks good. It can feel good. It can make an impact, but it's going to be so soft compared to the technical components of a trade note.
Yeah, I'm glad that Alex brought us back. I think as communicators, we have a tendency to wander. I'm glad he brought us back to the point of the conversation, which was trade publications. And I think exactly what he pointed out is our biggest hurdle with clients when it comes to wanting top tier is what is going to be the content of the story. And the content of the story in a top tier publication is rarely going to align with all of your business value propositions and talking points, whereas in trade, it probably can.
Really good.
Yeah, I was just like in an article last week talking about, how we canceled all meetings at our agency. It was no meetings week, yada, yada. That was a top tier publication. That's not really what people I'm selling PR to probably care about. They probably want to hear more about how the industry is going to change next year and how's the role of a PR manager going to evolve, or maybe they want to see a breakdown of the astronomer crisis, whatever that looks like. That's the person that I'm selling to. I can have that conversation in PR Daily. I just can't have that conversation with probably the New York Times or Globe and Mail have it.
Yeah, and
Well,
there's a time and place for both, right? Like doing the story on no meeting week was probably enjoyable and probably reached a different audience. Maybe it was great for your colleagues to see how canceling meetings for a week impacted morale at the agency. And so, I mean, again, it goes back to what are you really trying to accomplish? And there's a time and place for all of it. I think it's just about helping your clients stay focused on what's meaningful to them in the larger sense of the campaign that they're in right now.
And to that point too, earlier this year we got someone into Fox News on Father's Day. It was a woman who had nearly died in a car accident. That was great. The message only landed in one paragraph. We put a storytelling sandwich around it. But then that led to greater coverage at the local and regional media. Again, not trade, but a similar process of taking that big tier placement and then bringing it down to that local, regional, or trade level. And sometimes, again, it's the reverse. You get that local or regional trade placement that proves that that person can live in that big tier world, and then you launch it up. So it really sometimes can be that softer message, hooks the human interest, and then you add in the more technical language that is more relevant.
Yeah, let's be real. As PR people, like we want all of it, right? We want trade, we want top tier, we want the podcast, we want it all. So just figuring out how to make sure our clients also understand that balance.
Yeah, and I love live broadcasts, right? Particularly because that's the only venue, if you're good at it, when you have control over what airs, right? So, I mean, for me with clients, particularly in crisis, I like the live broadcast for a well-trained, thoughtful spokesperson, because regardless of what comes at you, you can always make sure that your message gets out.
That's a good point. And do you mean that that's because during a crisis, the people who don't normally cover that issue as closely are going to be being more technical about it?
No, I just mean because it's live. They can't edit it, right? Like,
oh. I see.
so like
The
any opportunity that you get to be live is great because you can always give your messaging, and they can go back maybe and edit it for reruns, etc. But live is always just that, live, and it's an unfettered opportunity to kind of speak your mind.
Yeah, I think also that's a good point, because I mean, I would consider live to be, a little bit more risky, depending on, you don't always know what kind of question you're going to get. But one thing that did pop into my head when you were talking, Alex, is not all spokespeople like their spoken word written down, right? They don't always feel like what they say translates well when they see it on the page. In a live interview, there's not much hiding from that. You said what you said, and it's on camera.
Yeah, well, as an ellipse guy, I love ellipses, but they're the enemy of the spokesperson in the written story, right? So there's nothing worse than having a great statement and seeing half of it appear in print. And I think that again, we're off course here, but I think that's, for me, what's so appealing about live is that they have to listen to you. They don't have to like what you say, but they have to listen to you if they're there.
Yeah.
Well, and it actually gets into the last thing I wanted to tackle here before we sign off, which is ensuring that we have the right spokespeople for the right platform, right? Some people who stutter maybe shouldn't be doing things live. The person who likes to debate and argue might be better for a podcast where it's long form versus social media where people take it personally. And so a lot of times, we have to make sure it's not just the briefing and the media training, but it's also where that spokesperson's strengths. And so, Grace, are you usually working with companies that have a significant executive team, or usually founder led, and that's the only person who's really acting as a spokesperson?
Could be either.
Okay. And then Alex, you've already said you prefer to have one spokesperson for continuity.
I mean, in crisis for sure. But again, I think, what you're talking about, Dustin, is important. And I think it comes down to access, right? Like, if you know your client well enough and know their organization well enough and know their people well enough to ascertain who's going to be a great match, you're winning as far as I can tell, right? Like if you have the relationship with your client where you have a media opportunity and you have the ability to consider among a number of different people who is the right cultural, technical and ability fit for an opportunity, you're 90% of the way there. Then you just got to find the time to put them together, and the magic happens. So I think getting to that point is half of the issue, right? Is understanding your client's organization and people well enough to make those choices. If you can do that, you're already a great deal of the way there.
Well, that's kind of the last thing I had to ask about and discuss. Is there anything we haven't tackled that you all want to wrap up on?
Well,
It's like the classic. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, I only had a comment, is that's the classic question. You're supposed to have something prepared to say. And I was going to say, I think we covered everything, which is what I tell my spokespeople not to say.
But we kind of did. And that's what I really liked about this conversation is we all had three different sort of angles. And like, Alex, I didn't expect you to say one spokesperson. And that led to a really dynamic, interesting conversation. So I really appreciate this. And again, Grace, today was our first time meeting. Alex, thanks for stepping in last minute here. And this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. I would close with saying one thing. In a world that is a yard wide and an inch deep, you can often set yourself apart by going deep. And I think, if trade pubs allow you to do that, you can really distinguish yourself, and your client can really distinguish themselves by willing to embrace that.
He's media trained.
That was one.
Not my first interview.
Folks, thanks so much. Really appreciate this. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Dustin. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, guys. Thanks so much.